Hey y'all, so I am making another video, and this is a response video to This Is a Revolution podcast, I believe. And they recently had a round table of sort podcast setup thing going on, discussing a crisis in masculinity, incels, and anti-natalism with Saturday Crew. I like the way that they spelled crew. But anyways, this is my response to it in regards to different topics that they discussed on the round table. Again, I've been floating in and out of leftist spaces and listening to more leftist content, and it has my brain spinning, so to speak, in a good way. And there's only so many characters that you could put in the YouTube comments, as well as I would like to reflect and give my own opinions on things. So this is that. Full disclosure, I am Black, I am woman, I am millennial, and I'm also first generation Haitian American. So if it matters, there's that as well. So,
what is the correlation between men's rights groups and men's rights activism and the men's rights movement and the birth of incel, particularly online incel culture?
So at the start, these movements were all kind of meshed together. You had like the men's rights activists. You had this other thing, which is men going their own way, which is like a very insipid kind of male separatist movement, which never really went anywhere or did any kind of real separatism. You had the red pill people and you had incels. And especially like in 2016, as you can read in a book like Kill All Normies, these movements were all kind of meshed together. But since then, they've kind of broken into pieces and become separated. There aren't really many, I mean, maybe there are red pill people still around, red pill men, but I don't really see much of them. These movements have slowly been pulled apart. And for me, my perspective on things is that incels, despite being portrayed in this way, aren't kind of a political movement of any kind. Because, right, you've never heard of like an incel protest or an incel, unlike, say, men's rights activists, or like fathers' rights activists, or other kind of like men-based movements. There's no kind of incel movement. There's no university clubs. There's no kind of protests for incels or anything like this. Rather, all you hear about incels in kind of a political sense is that occasionally one of them just goes so mad that they go on a killing spree, which I don't think makes something a political movement.
Is it safe to say that the rise of all of this discourse, ranging from men's rights activism to the incel discourse, is a consequence of a sentiment? The key word is a sentiment among a certain cadre of men who feel that they are aggrieved because the quote-unquote advances of second and third wave feminism have displaced them, and as a result, according to their belief, their normative ability to fulfill what is deemed the role of manhood is being threatened. Do you think that's part of the motivation behind this phenomenon?
It's definitely like, that's a key thing for traditionally the red pill idea, where kind of, you know, there's kind of Nazis who have this conspiracy to that kind of opium or, you know, kind of tricking the West and destroying the West. Red pillers had a very similar idea with kind of feminism, that kind of that women and feminists were kind of behind all the ills of society. But the thing with incels is, obviously they have this belief, but it's become at this point, I think, very backgrounded. When you go on an incel forum, the forums that you can find, there doesn't really seem to be much concern in this way. It's just guys kind of just talking about how bad things are for themselves. And for me, incel forums and places like this have a much stronger connection to like places like mental health forums and places on Reddit like r/short and r/small dick problems, of people who have these physical traits that they can't change and are quite desperate to change, but feel they have no real option of being able to do so, and kind of just despair online about it.
Is it safe to say that the incel, all of this crisis of masculinity phenomenon, is this rooted in the way in which capitalism or political economy has rendered men somewhat more precarious in the economy because there's more competition in the workspace for women? Also, we know logically if women have economic options, they are not going to acquiesce to subservience the way that they may have done in the past. And we also know that in the traditional kind of patriarchal marital paradigm, rooted in masculinist capacity to earn or be a wage earner, the breadwinner narrative, right? Which, as we know, right, which is a very important thing to note, that narrative is really a kind of post New Deal narrative of the kind of father knows best, middle class guy who is the breadwinner, the wife is home in a nice dress,
Do you want to join me?
Raising the kids and everything's okay. It's actually policy and government largesse that even makes that kind of 1950s leave it to beaver imagery possible.
Yeah, I agree completely.
But
so
is it the inability to live up to that really contrived standard that is causing this kind of crisis of masculinity that's manifested from incels to men's rights activists, red pill, black pill, all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, so historically we always had spare men. This is kind of one of the incel ideas of them being leftover or spare men. But in the past you had institutions like monasteries and things like this that these young men would go off to, and then more recently the army and things like this. And then, of course, as you say, this problem was very briefly solved from maybe 1950 to 1980, where, in fact, for a while, we basically had no spare men, or very few spare men, where everyone was kind of, not everyone, obviously, and there was whole racial dimensions, whatever, but for the greatest time in history, you had all of these people having, like, a successful, normal life. And then kind of neoliberalism's happened, this whole thing has been detonated, and those institutions that men used to go into, like monasteries and so on, have been detonated too. So you have spare men, but without the institutions that in the past you had a place to put them in. And so they're kind of, they're not just spare men without women in these conventional lifestyles, but they don't have anything to go into. They don't have any kind of alternative life. And so, yeah, they try and find community online, but these communities are incredibly toxic, and I think just makes things worse for themselves. Obviously for other people too, but considering, the ratio of incels to incels who commit a massacre, I think actually the primary person they're victimizing is just themselves. And I think we've got into a position where kind of we've got all these spare men, and we don't have anything for them to do, really. When they fail, it's kind of just, in kind of social democracies or social liberal countries, they just kind of stay at home and live on state aid. And this is kind of like a really shitty version of like the monastic structures we used to have. We just don't have anything for men like this to do. And they realize this. Like, I think like black pill guys are kind of more reasonable and normal in lots of ways than red pill guys are. They're less kind of delusional. Like, some of them are definitely delusional. There's nothing really wrong with them. Kind of, they have like a complex. But you look at some of these guys, and I read their kind of profiles on Reddit and elsewhere. And you look how they've lived and the condition they're in, and what chances and opportunities they have, and you're like, no, you're right. You really are actually fucked.
This is really important, right? Because, Summer, you want to follow up?
Oh, that was me. But I think that when it comes to the part of it is, I think, a side effect of a strain of Western culture that has sexual success as being one of the metrics of being a beautiful, successful person, right? That you are glamorous, you're desirable, it even gets tied into class, that money allows you access to more sexual partners, and you don't even have to choose between them. And you get to points when monogamy norms break down, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but one possible side effect is that, and I saw a feminist defense of Mormon polygamy made along the lines that most men are terrible, a small number of men are great. Why should women be limited to these terrible leftover men if they can just share one of the great ones? Like half of awesome, successful dude is better than 100% guy. From a strictly individual perspective, like happiness and welfare perspective, and even possibly from the perspective of fatherhood, that math may check out. But then you have, like Stefan was saying, all of these superfluous men in different regimes. You know, fascism has a solution for them. It's called war, right? It's called violence. Japan has a solution for them. It's called digital waifus and eventually sex bots.
Japan's better.
Yeah, Japan. I take that over the former. And in many other countries, they become exported as disposable labor, like in India, Pakistan, the Philippines. You have, well, India and Pakistan, certainly, you'll have men sent to Dubai, sent to the Emirates, sent elsewhere, where they live gender segregated, away from women, away from not just their own women, but the ability to meet women of any kind. And they're just worked until they either have enough of an economic stake to go back and potentially meet someone, or they meet an untimely demise.
I also want to state that if you think about it, when veterans were offered suburbia after World War II, where the government basically funded suburbia, if you look at it, that's like the luxurious version of like Section 8, affordable housing, project living. Like, it's the same aspects, but if we look at things as binary, where it's like everything has its opposites, so to speak. Low income housing was for like the rejected, the dregs of societies, right? Like the others, right? That was for the poors and the colors, right? And then this is government policy, it comes from the same place, the same government entity created suburbia, this idealistic fairy tale 2.5 kids in a picket fence type of reality that doesn't exist, because without government interference, we see what happened to the middle class. It has been taken over by opioid crisis and debt, right? And so the same thing with affordable housing. If the government doesn't fund that, then we don't have enough affordable housing for people. But also affordable housing, because if suburbia is the luxury aspect of it, that's the highest you can go, then the lowest you can go is affordable housing. And oftentimes in affordable housing, people think, oh, you're living for pennies on a dollar, you're taken care of, all you're going to do is produce children that you won't be able to financially take care of. The lie is that the housings are actually efficient. The lie is the housing is actually up to code. The lie is the housing is actually safe, as well as the lie is you would produce more children, knowing that the obstacles that you're currently facing and living in this affordable housing that amounts to crappy craftsmanship is due to the lack of sexual discipline. The idea of if you give people housing, they're going to be effing like rabbits is laughable, especially since we have an example from a rich, elite German guy. I'll put his information within editing this video, where basically He was the Jeff Bezos of his time. And instead of squandering his millions at the time with a dick rocket and a super yacht, he decided to create this little village where he basically funded all the housing in the village, and the housing is damn near free. It's cheap. It's very cheap. And in hearing that, you would think, oh, it's something like HUD, something like the Section 8 or the Project Living, when in actuality, it's totally different. It's modernized. It's efficient. These people don't have to have the estate of the rich man because he doesn't live there anymore. He's dead and gone. They don't have to prove any type of pre-qualifiers, also known as means testing. So like if you're going on government assistance of any kind, they'll be like, how much you make, who you live with, whoop-de-whoop whoop, all of your business, you gotta work these hours, you gotta be a student, this, that, and the third. This man, Jacob Fugger, I believe, he created his village, wealth and all, tricked it off on the people that matter, his own people, his own community, and did not think that they had to vie for their humanity, prove their destitution, like they have to swallow their dignity because they are poor, swallow their pride because they are poor. And therefore, when you are poor, you are nothing, and you are there to be follower for the rich, a plaything for the rich, a punching bag for the rich, devalued by the rich, dehumanized by the rich, discarded by the rich. Reject their dignity as they're asking for their fellow humans to help them, right? The difference between living in a capitalistic society versus living in a more humane, commune, empathetic society. And because of this German wealthy man, his village not only then provided housing and shelter for people at a very affordable and cheap cost. Still to this day, this village exists, and still to this day, it is modernized with all the accessibilities of modern society. And it's still very affordable because even in his death, he made it so that the village that he created to help low-income people will never not be affordable. That was literally in his estate till this day.
There are also countries where the reverse is true. In the greater Russosphere and in the Philippines, I think that when it comes to young women, there's an imbalance in the other direction. There's a shortage of men. And that creates its own different types of challenges where you have the export of lots of female labor, sometimes into the sex industry, sometimes into housemaids, sometimes domestic service, or sometimes just a kind of brain drain of high-end skilled labor as well, while the women who are left have to viciously compete with one another to try to monopolize whatever quality of man they can get a hold of. So the old religious and cultural templates prevented this sexual competition from becoming like a market, from becoming like, para-capitalistic. But gradually, as we've dismantled all of them, then it becomes an accelerator, an amplifier of the economic competition and the economic monopoly that you see over wealth and property in the material economy.
Black sex almost become an alternative to economic success, and sometimes a symbol of those.
Well, there's another fascinating component here as well, right? Is that the question becomes, and this is my position, there is a reason rooted in capitalist political economy as to why there is a logic to this male obsolescence. or rendering of men as obsolete. And I'm going to be very frank, and some people may not want to hear it. Female labor has a serious advantage over men in two regards. It's cheaper and it's less rebellious.
Yeah.
Prone to pregnancy disruptions, but
did you
yes.
hear that? That was the sound of the show being canceled.
I mean, cheaper is
well,
I mean,
I
it's
think
a contingent fact, but it's certainly been a fact.
Say again, Stefan. Can you repeat that, Stefan?
Well, it's just, if we look at history, we can probably say this is true, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily true, right?
I mean,
it's not essential to the gender.
I'm not saying it's just. It's just a consequence of the way in which female labor is exploited in a way in which, because they're deemed to be, they take too many days or whatever the justification. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but the reality is that women get paid less for the same tasks as men, and women have a tendency to be less rebellious in the workspace than men.
My take on Pascal's comment about women not bucking against the system is very true. I know a lot of women might have taken that comment as some type of sleight of hand, but let's be honest, women are bucking back socially. But even with socially, we have terms like mammy and terms like pick me. Women tend to fall in line with the order of things. We live in a hierarchical system, right? It's God, then man, then woman, then child. We tend to have this hierarchical thing going on within the system of imperialism and colonization. Everything is categorized. So yes, women tend to not buck against the system. Like, how many women say, oh, I'm off the clock. If you want me to do anything extra, you're going to have to pay me time and a half. Like, how many women really go for their benefits like that, really pull up their authority card like that? Women tend to fall in line. Women tend to not want to cause any waves, especially if they are the first woman in their department of blah, 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 or they're the only woman of color in their cubicle circle. So like, women tend to fall in line. Let's just be clear. Let's just be honest about it.
The most intensive and long working hours of any practice that Marx describes are women workers. Like, the men is obviously heavier work, but in terms of hours, it was definitely the women throughout capital.
Yeah, and women take on these heavy work of house duties, while a lot of them doing those while they're supporting the family. So they're kind of double contributing to the household, while part of that is unrecognized. One
of the main crises for Victorian moralists, and one of the reasons they were kind of concerned with reducing working hours, is the proletarian women would work these incredible hours, and obviously they wouldn't be able to home make. It was simply impossible. And they, bourgeois or aristocratic people would visit the house and be like, oh, the women aren't doing the thing, and they're like, oh shit, really, we've forced a system which is going to destroy exactly the things that we hold sacred. I mean, that's just been the past couple of 100 years.
I think you were mistaking also. I'm not arguing that this is some kind of ontological, biological thing. I'm saying
not sexual essentialism.
Yeah, no, it's not sexual essentialism. This is the way in which, under the parameters of capitalism, female labor is used. I'm not advocating that this is a good thing or a natural thing. It's a product of the structure and the way it exists and how it frames the utility of female labor.
There's also an intersection in more patriarchal, sexist societies, and my mister is a good example, or China, South Korea, China, where female labor also doesn't need to be considered for promotion. It is not a threat to executives or leaders. So you can use women, you can put them to work, you can have them do excessive hours, but not only are they less likely to unionize or complain in a working class environment, but in a white collar environment, they know that they're going to tap out, and they're less likely to engage in the bureaucratic competition over promotion, less likely to be a rival when opportunities do come up to advance. And this makes them very handy to have around.
Yeah, and you can fire them whenever before they want to get a baby, and you're gonna say that you're not gonna be around. Why should I keep you?
Exactly. The great thing is they don't even have to be pregnant. You just have to tell people they were.
And as the other panelists discussed, not only Pascal and Jason, but I forgot his name, but I know it's Polish. So like the Polish white guy. Yeah. The Polish white guy, what he was saying was not just like women are inherently submissive, it's a programming thing, right? Boys play with the Legos and the trucks, the girls play with the teacups. Like, it's a social thing, yes, but also women tend to do more of the care work when it comes to who fill the roles of teachers, who fill in the roles of nurses, who fill in the roles of daycare workers. It tends to be women. Women tend to do the tasks that has to do with emotional labor, that has to do with service. Like, it just is. So because women are doing these low working, low earning jobs, not because these women are useless or these women don't have enough education. It just tends to be the role that a lot of women take because it's available in abundance. A lot of men, you don't find them doing those roles, as well as, again, like I believe maybe Jason or the Polish guy mentioned, in this system, there is a gender pay wage gap. Like, it is a thing. Women tend to make less money than men. White women make about 78 cents off of a whole white man's dollar, whereas black women makes around like 63 cents off of a whole white male dollar. So even when it comes to gender pay wage gap, there is also a racial component. So yes, they are right in that aspect. If you are a CNA, if you are a daycare worker, if you are a teacher or you're overworked and underpaid, you're less likely to tell your boss where he could shove it. You're less likely to say no when they want to overwork you and underpay you. You're less likely to speak up. You're less likely to say, I'm going to unionize. You're less likely to be like, I'm going to take you to small claims court. You're less likely to push those buttons, not only because of social programming of women are supposed to be nice and dainty and follow the rules and be liked by men, but also because we work these shitty ass jobs that underpay us, that undervalue us, and don't even give us benefits that matter, if they give us benefits in general. So he is right on that aspect.
There's one social alternative in China where both parents would work after they give birth to a baby. Their parents would come to help because they're kind of bored, they're retired, they have extra energy. Some are voluntary, some are kind of forced by the young couple, so that the young couple wouldn't sacrifice their life. However, it is the parents who's, and it's like, I wouldn't say brainwashed, but like it's quite widespread, and in the point that my parents, and like that's the way my family does things and my parents offer. I just think that's horrific. Like, if you cannot take this responsibility, taking your own child, just give it to your parents. How is that better?
And there's also the 3-generation household model where your parents move in. And this was common in Poland when when I was young, back in the People's Republic. It's common in Vietnam and China too. And
it was a
because
normal
you're
thing for history,
cohabiting,
basically.
yeah, it's well, there's also the like 7-generation household where there's a lord and then like his wife, his 3 concubines, the secret wife that he keeps in his dungeon, his men at arms, his sons, his illegitimate sons, cousins. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the 3 generations was pretty normal, and you had a generational division of labor that helped facilitate things like childcare. This also happens if you have multiple households living together, but part of late capitalism is atomization, right? The incel variant is like the 0 generational household. It's one person alone at their computer without human connection. But the thing is that the market wants to replace every other source of support, every other source of goods, even meaning, but it cannot replace what we need from each other. The help, the support, the love, the care that really comes with having strong relationships, which aren't just based on what I'm getting, whether they reflect on what I want. And moving away from making that possible, again, like you said, would require much more than even Bernie was promising in terms of reorganizing our society.
I think the position of capitalism right now, and someone put the word up, is atomization. Basically, we want to destroy your capacity to have social structures. We want you living in your cubicle-like home, working 13 hours a day in front of your computer, being clocked by your digital,
That's a new thing. The face recognition and some
face recognition
jobs
and all that stuff.
To work at home. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think COVID, I'm not trying to get conspiracy, but COVID provides an example of the capacity to maintain productivity in a socially atomized society.
Even to Pascal's point, people may like Bernie's policies, right? But they fear the word socialism. Like, they think socialism is this like destructive force that's going to turn us into the purge real life edition, when actuality, if it wasn't for socialism, we would be less than 6 degrees from slave and slave owner. Like, the fact that we have safety policies, the fact that we have a retirement, the 40-hour work week, insurance and things of that nature comes out of socialism. But people allow the right to determine the narrative, and they make socialism look like something evil or some type of like dependency on the system, like you're going to turn into a quote unquote welfare queen. And it's like, the things you don't know.
Got the heat around here.
It's hot and...
Yeah.
What's up?
Don't be touching up on me.
Okay. You're not gonna speak?
Hey, maid. I see you got on your maid outfit like you always do. I don't blame you.
Maid
you got it clean.
outfit. I have on a t-shirt.
You got it clean.
That's what.
Ain't that what you're clean with? You need to buy her a fur like you bought me one.
Get this hoe out the house.
I could take your man again if I wanted to. Molly the maid.
Freaky dancer, dancing for money. Do what you want me to do. Ready. Freaky dancer, dancing for money. Freaky dancer, fuck me with my hands ready.
Now, when it comes to socially, yes, you could say women do buck back the system of hierarchy and the system of patriarchy, whether we're talking about the slut walks of Amber Rose and the slut walks that existed before Amber Rose, or whether we're talking about women even wearing jeans. Like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, women wearing jeans was so taboo. Women wearing jeans today is very just average. So yes, have to a degree buck the system, but there will always be women who will be like Meghan McCain, my father, my father, my father, my father, my father.
My father, my father, my father, my father, my father is my father, my father's my father, my father, my father. I mean, my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father's my father, 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 my father's my father, my father, my father, my father's my father, my father's my father, 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 my father. I am John McCain.
Who literally bend and kiss the dick tip of patriarchy. Whether we're talking about the Serena prototypes from the show The Handmaid's Tale, whether we're talking about women who go out of their ways to be picked, who go out their way to be like, those women do that, but I do this. There'll always be women who are ready to throw other women underneath the bus to save themselves. Insert Hillary Clinton while her husband was getting his ding-a-ling-a-ling sucked by someone who was not her. But anywho, yes, that exists. Pascal is right on that.
To the point of women even bucking the system in regards to gender norms. Like, yes, women are quote unquote stepping out of gender normalities, especially with sexuality, especially with Black women, you know, the Meg Thee Stallions, the hot girls, the new rap girlies. However, even with the lyrics, it sounds super badass, it sounds super empowering, it sounds super sexual agency, but when you listen to the lyrics, it's no different than face down, ass up, tip drill. Instead of Nelly saying, I need a tip drill, these women are saying they themselves are the tip drill that they are selling and buying. Instead of having a pimp, they are pimping themselves. So the women empowerment turns into denigration.
As well as with female empowerment, this whole claiming your sexuality through the male gaze, which is backwards. It's like literally 360 right back to female oppression. The captain of the Hot Girl ship, Miss Hot Girl, Megan Thee Stallion herself from Houston, she is representing that essence. I wouldn't necessarily say taking charge of that woman bucking back against stereotypical female gender role normalities, especially around sexuality, display of sexuality, what is womanhood, defining it yourself, your body, how you choose to present, my body, my choice. But also Houston is the hub of sex trafficking, and a lot of sex trafficking victims are young Black women. There's upwards of 84,000 plus Black women who are missing in the United States, just vanished. So no one has missing Black woman syndrome when Black girls and Black women go missing. No one's really freaking out and having the community come together to have a people search party. So with that being said, women do buck back against the system of gender normalities, and some women do want to be a nasty girl, but usually the women who can parade in that bucking against the system are women who won't receive the backlash. Like Meg Thee Stallion can talk about all the freaky things that she may or may not be into because she can monetize it, but the average Black girl embodying that type of energy will find herself in the sex trade and not as the pimp, oftentimes the pimped.
Suck a nigga dick a song. 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 My nigga D Magic said he had to have it. I said just forget it. It's too crowded. Know a little freak in Hollywood sucks on dick. Does it real good.
Yeah, so it's a work in progress with women bucking the system nonetheless, but to the extent of women being able to say like, yeah, I need this gender pay wage gap closed ASAP is something men would do. I would even just putting it out there, my guess, when it even comes down to the John Deere strikes, I would put my bet on it that the majority of the legwork when it came to organizing the strike, pushing for the strike, and things of that nature are men. Not only because the workforce that does the heavy building of the tools John Deere produces are men in that field, but also it tends to be men who rebel and buck the system. Like even with the Boston Tea Party, I'm pretty sure it was white men who were throwing tea over in the harbor. Like not too many women were in there. It just tends to be that way, whether it is social programming or whether it is because of things that limit women from their autonomy, which usually means children, care work, meaning that they are probably doing, like, let's say a career in CNA and they also have an elderly family member that they're taking care of, or they're a single mother, or they're just a mother in general and they have kids that depend on them. So in those roles you have less wiggle room to bark, especially for the fact that those roles tend to pay very light wages. We'll say that they pay honestly just disgraceful wages, and oftentimes it's not salary, and oftentimes there's no benefits there either. So and then in those fields there's like the whole per diem and versus like contract worker versus like W-2 worker versus like it's a hierarchy. So for women who are occupying those roles, especially Black women, most times than not, they will not buck the system, even though they know they're being taken advantage of, because they don't have a strong bargaining chip. Whereas men, even if they don't have much, even if they are struggling, they know that they can quote unquote bum off of someone, or they have other men that they can lean on, or family members, women, sisters, mothers, cousins that they can lean on. Whereas women don't tend to have those same strong support systems, especially when women are taking care of someone who is dependent on them, whether it is an elderly family member or a child.
Proud Mary, keep on burning, and we're rolling, rolling, yeah, rolling on the river. Say we're rolling, rolling, yeah, rolling on the river,
Thank you. Because I had a thought, a question. Because you mentioned this experiment, I think it's really interesting because remember I read an academic paper about the source of CCP's victory in China, why Communist Party won. And one of the very interesting angle is that Mao and the Communist Party kind of deploy this policy to kind of, I wouldn't say force monogamy, but to like encourage every man to find its women and women find its men, to form this little 2 or 3 person, I mean the baby is the third person, economic unit, and give them land. In this way, it stabilized the kind of liberated area, or that's literally what it is, 解放区 in Chinese, for better economic productivity. So when you said that, I just feel like Mao had probably thought about it and somehow sorted it out at the beginning, or during the Civil War with the nationalists. That's my thought. It's just I am welcome for feedback, and I also have a question. So is there there's obviously an option to choose between black and red pill. I wonder if there's any statistics or any observation about what kind of if there's any kind of men that would do certain options, especially like with regards to social status. Are higher status men tend to do red instead of black?
Yeah, I mean that was my assumption too. That kind of the red pill is a bad strategy, but if that you're a high status man who's relatively attractive, you can still succeed using it, and then you'll kind of delude yourself into thinking the red pill's the right way. While if you're already like an unattractive, badly socialized, low status guy or whatever, and you try and employ red pill strategies, you'll obviously almost certainly fail because they revolve around being unpleasant. But I don't know any studies or statistics which look into this. Because my impression definitely is that the black pill is more common than the red pill these days. And I was trying to Google it, but it's all thrown out of whack because the red pill is actually from the Matrix movie, while the black pill is like just a thing they made up. And so the red pill's always having more stats to it, even though in reality I think the black pill's more popular. So it's hard to investigate on that basis.
There's a really horrible movie called The Red Pill that I watched on accident on Amazon, and it's about a woman that says she was a feminist, and then she met men's rights activists, and they showed her the way.
Oh wow!
The red pill. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
What's a very interesting twist? If we're going to talk about anti-natalists later, the main anti-natalist philosopher, who I've now forgotten the name of, South African guy, he's also a men's rights activist. So yeah, it's wheels inside wheels. It all connects up.
They were having a men's rights protest in the beginning of the film too. There was probably like 11 dudes that were mad. I can't remember what they were mad about, but I think it had something to do with women.
I guess I have a question too. Of like, when we talk about stats, what's your best guess as far as the significance, of these groups of individuals? And I'd say first, like, especially too, of like, as it relates to this, this can be an ideology or some belief that leads people to do something dangerous, which is absolutely concerning. But I guess, like, yeah, what's your best guess as far as the overall, what is the larger, population of people who you think are engaging in this? And the potential for later on issues.
Yeah, so I think this is a reason to be really kind of concerned with incels and the black pill and all these kind of ideas, because if we look at statistics, we can see that a massive number of men and women, especially young people that kind of hit adulthood during the pandemic, and you really had no chance to have sex, have never had sex, or for older people, they haven't had sex in a very long time. And obviously, some people just don't have sex. But I imagine for most of these people, they prefer to be having sex, or at least occasionally, whatever. And so and then I think there's not very many incels, as in people who then build an identity around it. But I think they have a massive potential base of people. And it's a very toxic identity that will make things worse for them and worse for others. So I think it is important to be concerned because of this.
Kuba, you want to jump in? I guess not.
Kuba, can you hear
us? He's speaking on the other side. I can hear him talking in real life, but so it's very.
Oh, is he
Wait.
I think he's still talking.
Yeah, he just started talking now on stream. What the fuck?
I feel bad for him. I feel bad.
I'm so good.
You just need to go sit next to someone and they can share a headphone.
By the way, I did not know that Kuba had the skill where he could talk without moving his lips. That's some deep state shit. That was
proof that he's a robot.
Oh my god! Oh my god! I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
He was literally talking without moving his lips. How did he do that?
Who would talk? Who would talk?
It's so funny.
Dude, just walk on the other side of the table, man. You totally, they got you this time.
Just break the fourth wall.
Just break the fourth wall.
Turns out we know each other.
I can't stop.
What I wanted to ask, right, is that what is the correlation between this discourse of men's rights activists, incels, red pill, blue pill, crisis of masculinity, and the rise of the reactionary right? And why is it, as we had a commenter here, I believe it was Andy William, and Andy William, who was one of our people in our chat, made a very good observation, and I agree with his observation, actually, that all of this paranoia around performative patriarchal positioning is absolute catnip for the reactionary right, not only in the United States, but everywhere. Because I was doing some reading, and they were talking about fascism. And the thing that's fascinating is that the article said something I found interesting. It said fascism is a cultural project of male redemption.
Another point I wanted to discuss was the whole like young people starting their lives. And I should mention, since I'm talking about this, I did do a podcast episode on the Black Woman Vibes podcast. I think it was like season 2, episode 1, where I discussed rejection. I actually had Elliot Rodger, like the king incel himself, who, you know, shot college campus white girls who rejected him because he just felt like, why are these white girls being attracted to black guys? And he had his, like, I don't know, Caucasian revenge, heavy on the Caucasian because he was biracial, half Asian, half white. But nonetheless, that's why I'm also just discussing this podcast episode on This Is the Revolution, to give, I guess, another glance at the topic of rejected men, the leftover men.
I think that what Summer and Pascal are saying is that rather than gender relations and sort of family formation, relationship templates being something apolitical that's from the private realm, you actually have a great deal of political engineering of the relationships between men and women. In Poland, under communism, and as a kind of Eastern Bloc rule, you could only apply for housing if you were a couple, and under conditions of extreme scarcity, only if you were a couple with a child. Otherwise, you were living with your parents forever. And this created an incentive for people to pair up, completely apart from any questions of sexual or romantic attraction. And Jordan Peterson, famously, when the first incel debate came to the head of public discussion, talked about, you know, we're going to redistribute sexual partners, you know, maybe mandatory monogamy or something is our way out of this problem. And he was obviously intended it as a kind of provocation, help build his brand and force reassessment of the value of traditional monogamous, you know, Christian family patterns. But he's actually tapping into something that existed in China, it existed in the Eastern Bloc.
It's becoming a global phenomenon. Do you remember that comedian? He's like a white guy or something, and he was doing a gig about ISIS, and he's like, those ISIS,
oh yeah,
they stole my audience.
Yeah, Doug Stanhope has this great bit that the recruiting pool for ISIS is disaffected, angry young men on the internet. And he's like, ISIS, back off. That's my corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an incredible pool for so many different kinds of movements and people and whatever. But I mean, it's how you get lots of online communists as well.
Yes, well, exactly. It's, we fish that pool, you know, we fish that lake ourselves, and hopefully to better effect.
Well, here's the question. Let me ask you. Let's get to the crux of this. Does this phenomenon exist? Now I know that the men's rights activism thing predates the incel phenomenon. There were men's rights activists before the internet, right? The men's rights activists, for those who are unaware, originally started as a result of divorced or single men complaining about how family law or domestic marital law disadvantaged them in issues of child custody and support. And a lot of them were fathers who wanted custody of their children, and they felt that the family law system inherently benefited women, or the child support system inherently benefited women. So the early beginnings of the men's rights activists, and I'm not saying, I mean, I worked in family law, I'm not trying to give validity or criticism to the argument, but the early crux of the argument was about family structure and access to kids, and to be able to visit, father support.
I mean, it could be called critical gender theory if it developed in a different political direction.
Right. That was a kind of the original kind of manifestation. With the rise of the internet, particularly in the beginning of the millennium, the discourse changed, and it wasn't just simply about grievance about family law, child custody, child support. It started to become a kind of place where men would basically complain about the inability to have women adhere to their demands about what they think women should do relative to reacting to them. I.e., women aren't, quote unquote, what's the word I'm looking for? They aren't deferential enough, or they don't cater.
Submissive.
They don't cater to us enough. They're not submissive enough. So it starts to evolve in the internet in the digital age, right?
And it's interesting because it's a secularization of Christian conservative notions of the role of fathers and families as being patriarchs, enjoying headship, having authority, where it's not you. If you need the law to keep your woman in line, you aren't right with God.
It's beyond Christianity too, because Confucianism has the very same thing. So.
Right. So this whole kind of, this is very fascinating because there's a religious component, right? There's an economic component, and there's obviously a sexual component. But I would argue, and I really would like some feedback from you guys, is that these crises definitely have a material economic consequence, right? But I think that even without the 2008 crash, because the question I was going to ask is that if there is no 2008 crash, do we have the incel phenomenon? But I would argue that even if we didn't have the incel phenomenon post 2008, that there would be some form of contemporary crisis of masculinity provocation, simply because the way I look at it, and I like your guys' critique, is that with 2 generations into second wave feminism, and we're seeing young men who never grew up with that Ozzie and Harriet notion of parenthood, yearning for something that they really didn't see that much anyway.
Yeah.
Which is a real thing, not only in their discussion, but also a real thing with women. There are leftover women, and it's the gag because there are a lot of leftover women, especially in the Black circles of the YouTube, who are very much despondent, very much feel dejected, and very much feel the same way that these incel and MGTOW guys feel. But I will get to my conclusion why they don't cross each other's pathway in a more healthy and let's partner up way. They tend to be at war with each other. But back to my second point that I wanted to talk about that was discussed was the partnering aspect, right? Polish guy talks about how in Poland, like when the government was giving and trying to format itself to imperialism, format itself to colonization, right? This is the difference between the old world and the new world. The new world is industrial revolution, is colonization, is imperialism, is globalism. Whereas the old world was very tribal or very communal, very village-like, very much. And sometimes it was a little bit wives' tales, a little bit of witchery, but nonetheless, these are the roots, these are the foundations of who you are, right? Old world versus new world. Polish guy talked about how the government of Poland during where I guess they were formatting themselves into westernize the new world order, so to speak. And he talked about how the Polish government was giving out land to young couples who were actual young couples who didn't have any like outside babies. So like no bastards, no babies with outside of the union of marriage. And they were pretty much married.
So for a lot of young Polish people where you don't have a lot of economic options, you're young, you're horny, and you want your own privacy, it makes sense that you would partner up with literally anybody that you want to hump up on, and anybody you feel like you could split bills with and who would agree to marry you. That's what you would do. You would get married for the advantage of having your own space outside of your parents' home, as well as you can explore your sexuality and the things that make you leap for joy. And I think with the Polish guy, his co-host or his partner on the screen, she mentioned how the same thing happened in Vietnam, I believe, or in China, where the government basically was handing out land to people who probably were a lot more socialist minded, in the sense of like, there's no titles, polygamy, polyamory, and polygamy was just one of the possible lifestyles people indulged in. The governments were like, hey, if you change your behavior, your social ways, then you are rewarded economically with land. What can you do with land? You can use your land to turn it into a business, but you could also plant crops. You can also have your own foundation to build a home. A land is very versatile. It is something that gives you longevity. So in that instance, a lot of Vietnamese and a lot of Chinese people decided it would be best, especially the young ones, to get together, to become more monogamous, and to gain the benefit of land. So a lot of these governments, when leaving the old world thinking to enter the new world thinking, not only did they lose their sense of culture and identity, but they adhered to a social programming that was not beneficial and of their own doing. It was out of survival. So we're seeing marriage as a contract versus maybe a spiritual enlightenment, or just a natural course of, I've lived my life, I made my decisions, and now I am ready to become one with you, versus like, hey, I got these bills, I got these mortgage, I'm trying to see how I can flip this into a middle class lifestyle, partner up and let's do this thing. So it becomes more transactional versus a spiritual journey or personal development journey, which in many instances in old societies, or let's say Eastern societies, partnering up, especially in a union, was more of a spiritual enlightenment, versus now it's more of a social contract, transactional, right? This is why women take on these low-level jobs, because a lot of men don't take them, as well as it gives women enough flexibility, let's say quote unquote mom hours. However, when you have mom hours, they can finesse whatever contract to pay you less and without benefits. All these things of insecurity for women, because they know women are disposable. That's the way that this capitalistic system sees women, as disposable, especially once women hit their mid to late 20s and they want to start families. That's where they could quote unquote replace women, because once they see women more focused on their families, they assume that the woman is going to leave the workplace, or the woman somehow is going to be less capable of doing the same work that she did prior to pregnancy, because for some whatever reason, capitalism believes once women have children, women are somehow defective. So those are my opinions on that.
I don't cook, I don't clean, but let me tell you, I got this ring.
Of course, which leads to young people getting married, not because it is something that they intrinsically want to do. It leaves young people wanting to get married to escape their home lifestyle, want their privacy, want to rebel, want to expand themselves, start sniffing themselves, they want to have, sex. But also it leads young people to not do that personal development of themselves, to know who they are outside of a partner, which circles back to the initial topic of this podcast for This Is a Revolution, the incels and MGTOW. A lot of these men are crying and whining about why they can't hump on somebody, but they have no real intrinsic value. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're about. They don't know what is their goal, what is their vision, right? They would be, if for an example, if they were Malcolm X and locked up in prison, they would be the version of Malcolm X who didn't read the books, who didn't pray, who didn't discipline themselves, they would be the ones who come in and out of jail because they have nothing grounding them. Whereas Malcolm X knew he wanted to change. The information of the Nation of Islam intrigued him enough to want to investigate, and on his own free will, intent, and fruition, he went out and sought information through the prison libraries. I'm going to take those as confirmations because twice during this, like less than 10 minutes of me recording, an ambulance is flying up the street and a police cruiser car is flying down the street. So I'm going to take those as confirmation as I continue recording my response. So yes, it lacks that principle. It lacks that humanity within self, because before you can treat anybody and link up with anybody, be partnered with anybody, you have to be a whole and healthy vessel. This is why you see it often in this dating lifestyle of young people, including me, where it's like this desire to be partnered is like life or death. It's like the air in my lungs. I need someone to validate me. I need somebody to love me, whether it's Love Island, whether it's even that MTV cringy show Next, whether it's whatever. It's this, the Bachelorette, the Bachelor, this thing of this someone outside of me, someone who is not me is going to fulfill me in ways that I can't fulfill myself. So once people get linked up and partnered up, they realize that that's not the creme de la creme. Maybe the packaging, i.e. the exterior, was good enough to marry, but like once I peel back the psychological layers, maybe not so much, especially if that person hasn't done any shadow work of self and they are looking for the other person to heal them, to fix them, to be their therapist, to be their significant other, to be their best friend, to be their teacher. They're looking for something outside of themselves. They are broken and they're expecting their significant other to fix them in some way, shape, or form. That's what you see in the dating world, and even people who are partnered and unfortunately married, and they oftentimes do end up getting divorced. On the other side of the aspect, the incels, the ones who are rejected, because they don't see that other side of the coin, partnering up just to partner up, they feel rejected. They feel like they are missing out on something. And instead of doing that personal development, i.e. the example of Malcolm X, they just sit and stew in that energy of rejection, and nobody wants me, nobody likes me, the girls want the Chads and the Brads, and I'm not good enough, I'm short, and I'm not first, whatever the case may be. They sit in that energy and then they attract other like-minded, because birds of a feather flock together. They join other men who feel the same rejected, dejected type of way. So they fuel each other's rejection, others' shadow energy, each other's low self-esteem, and they hive mind in that negative energy until one of them ends up becoming an Elliot Rodger, or they end up feeling as if women are the cause of their issue, instead of seeing that it's the system of things, it's the economic incentive of things, it's the capitalism of things.
Do what he say and you keep your mouth shut. Popping that trash might get you fucked up. We'll sit and cry if the dope man strike you. He don't give a fuck, he got two just like you. There's another girl in the dope man's life. Not quite a bitch, but far from a wife. She's called a Strawberry and everybody knows Strawberry. Strawberry is the neighborhood hoe. Do anything for a hit or two. Get a bitch around, she fuck the whole damn crew. It might be your wife and it might make you sick. Come home and see her mouth on the dope man's dick. Strawberry, just look and you'll see her. But don't fuck around, she'll give you gonorrhea. And people out there not hip to the fact that Strawberry is a girl selling pussy for crack to the dope man, dope man.
Well, I'm the dope man, yeah, boy, wear corduroy. Money up to here, but unemployed. We keep smoking that rock, and my pocket's getting bigger.
Yo, got that 5-0 double up, nigga.
Yeah, high rolling, big money, I'm folding. Bitch on my tip for the dick I'm holding. Sprung Strawberry jocking me so early. Hold you wanna hit, you gotta get your knees dirty. Now that's my life, that's how it's cut. Hey, dope man, bitch, shut the fuck up. Gotta make a run, it's a big money deal. Yankers got the fake, but you can get the real from the dope man, dope man.
Every day.
it's interesting because I was having a conversation yesterday in regards to how men are so willing and able to confront women and tell women, which kind of inserts the part of Jason with Kevin Samuels, which is when I fell off and I just left the podcast. Not because I personally have any gripe with Kevin Samuels or anything that he said. Truth be told, I have never in my life listened to, was inquisitive of, read commentary on Kevin Samuels. I know what that energy is. I know what that energy is for. I've seen enough black women on these YouTube and internet spaces lose their shit because of some rando sweeter than a switcher, misogynistic, sexist, colorist, and probably internalized racist black man who knows that it's a come up to make fun of black women. It's a come up to pick on black women. It is the equivalent of what Tucker Carlson does to the liberals. It's a grift, yes. It's a money making scheme, yes. So why would I get in a tizzy with some random thinks about me when you have no influence over my life in any way, shape, or form? Like, the fuck? But I get it. But I don't engage. Period. So I don't even engage. I don't engage in the gender war. I don't even engage in the race war. I'm very vegan and I'm very peaceful on this side. But anywho, these men tend to be upset at women and castigate women and try to patriarchal backlash onto women instead of looking at the system of thinking, seeing how this is unfair by nature. Instead of saying like capitalism is the reason why we can't have access to women because of the economic incentive for the Brads and the Chads to get all the women. So if the Brads and the Chads didn't have a dominance over all the resources, whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about land, whatever you consider resources is, if all the Brads and the Chads, the Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, the athletes, the whatever, didn't have such a monopoly on the wealth, then perhaps you, non-Chad and non-Brad, could get the pussy too. But instead of doing that, men combating other men, men checking other men, even if it takes you to battling other men, that's a lot more riskier because men can match each other's energy. Men can match each other's strength. It's just easier to dominate someone underneath you on the hierarchy of things. Again, God, man, woman. It's just easier to beat on women because women are more palatable to chase the male gaze. Women are more economically unstable because they get paid less and tend to occupy the jobs that are just the suckiest. And that women are more likely to listen to what you have to say and bend to your whim, whereas men will probably clock you in your face. That's why men will not check other men, even if they're right, even if that man is trash and exhibiting all types of toxic masculinity. Their own brother won't check that, but will tell women what they need to do to not be X, Y, and Z, to not have this X, Y, and Z experience, but won't check the toxic masculine pink elephant in the room. So, yes, there's that.
Feed me, I'm hungry. He love hood pussy, so he fuck me in my bonnet. Only niggas hate me is the ones that can't afford it. This is a motherfucking broke nigga warning.
Bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks. Bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks. Bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks. Bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks.
And then my final conclusion on everything, I think, unless I missed something and I might just add it later on in this video. The point of the incels, because there's incels, again, male incels and female incels, just like they are the leftover men, there are the leftover women. Those leftover women traditionally would be the bridesmaid, never the bride. They would be the one who works at the home. So she's the homemaker, she's the laundress, she's the sitter, she's the nanny, she's the live-in nanny. Those are also quote-unquote leftover women, right? Even comfort women or women who don't have consistent path in the sense of like, A consistent path would be, I work at this Fortune 500 company, I am senior management. Like, that is a set path. You know, you're clocking in here, you're leaving out that, you're making this salary. You have these things already set in stone. Whereas leftover women, their lives are not categorized. Leftover women are also the bag lady. Leftover women are also the homeless lady, the cat lady. Like, leftover women are also like the ex-prostitute or the ex-party girl. Leftover women are the ones who never left home or never was chosen, quote unquote, by the brads, by the chads. Those are also leftover women. So, like, in both sides of the coin, there's leftovers. The common sense, at least the way I see it, way would be the leftover men and the leftover women would come together, because that would make sense. Both of them are yearning partnership, they're yearning intimacy, humanity, they're yearning for some type of relationship. It would make sense for them to come together, but that would just be too right? On a Carl Jung way of seeing things, they don't want each other. They reject each other, because even though they are both leftovers, they see each other as rejects. They are repulsed by each other, even though they are of the same dating scale, if that makes sense. Like, when people say you're dating out of your league, you're dating in your league, leftover men and leftover women would be of the same league. But the same way where we in outside, I guess you could say, leftover society wouldn't date someone who has a great personality, but they're like a janitor, which, depending on what municipality, a janitor could make really good money. Like, don't sleep on that. But because of society and society's roles and rules and etiquette and what is deemed superior and respectable work and what is deemed lowly and disgusting work, a lot of women would look over the janitor with a great personality, even if he makes good money, because he's a janitor, because of his job, right? That gaze of capitalism and disconnecting from our humanity and evaluating people based on these hierarchical standards, whether we're talking about patriarchy, whether we're talking about racism, whether we're talking about class structures, the same thing in leftover society happens in outside leftover society, where because they are of the same league, they still despise each other, they still resent each other, because if you were to date your own league outside societies, both leftover societies, both the leftover men and the leftover women, it would just reinforce their leftoverness, so to speak, and they would feel even more despondent, because the issue isn't the lack of partnership. The issue is the lack of intrinsic value of the incel woman or the incel man has for themselves. They don't value themselves. They don't love themselves. They don't do any self-care of themselves. They don't develop themselves. They don't have any intrinsic value, right? And they're thinking that this partnership outside themselves of someone who is of a higher league will somehow validate them. And of course, that seems very hocus pocus in the sense of, like, why would a quote unquote 10 date a 5? But also, if you are a 5 and you deem yourself a 5, what are things that you can do to make you more qualified? If your weakness is your appearance, then what are the things that you can do to make you more of a catch, right? A lot of these incel MGTOW dudes, they complain about how their exterior isn't found attractive, even though beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What Western society finds attractive, Eastern society may not find attractive. Go where you are loved, go where you are celebrated, instead of just tolerated. But a lot of these men, these rejects, I'm just going to put it out there, the incels and the MGTOWs, they don't want to date within their quote unquote league, because they don't even like their league. They don't even like other incels. They don't even like themselves. And that's true tea. That's the true shadow work that they need to do. Because it doesn't matter if you're dating a 10 or dating a 4. If you ain't right within, you will always feel rejected and you will always reject others. Because the real issue isn't being partnered or not being partnered. It's you. So fix you and work on that discipline. Work on your strengths. And soon you'll see life starts going the way that you see fit, because you've worked on your psychic issues, your mental issues, whether it's real mental illness or like mental affliction, so like stress, PTSD, depression, whatever. Work on that and you'll start to see life start fitting into place. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think. I am going to edit this video, do all the tags to This Is a Revolutionary Podcast, and I would like to know your opinions down below. The incels, the MGTOWs, even the black women going their own way, all of y'all remember when I made that video, Black women divest from divestment? This is what I was talking about. Like the lack of self-awareness, the lack of seeing yourself and seeing how like crazy you look, not because you're quote unquote bucking against society, but because you don't even see your own shadow and it's blatant. Work on that. So that's all I got for today. Let me know what you think. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video. Peace.
I don't need your validation, cause I got me in medication. I don't need your validation, cause I got me in medication.
So, yes, what the Polish guy and Jason were also talking about in regards to be able to get these rejected and dejected, despondent type of men out of their feelings and feeling like real quote-unquote patriarchs, would to be able to reverse the hand of time. Not where women were not in the workplace and getting their asses beat by their husbands, and not back in the times where women needed men's permission to get credit cards, but back to a time where living was affordable, where we had more freedoms, when you partnered up with someone because you truly valued them versus let's go half on this mortgage. We would have to go back to a time where we prioritize humanity and human connections, community, more than capitalism. But the capitalists will not allow that to happen. And the more and more people not be able to reach the American dream, the more and more they will reject from society, the more and more they will repel from society and join these online or in-person fringe groups that recite the same message of you're not good enough, you're not tall enough, you're not a man enough, you're not this, that, and the third enough, which will often resulting in women receiving the backlash, i.e. male violence. But also it will result in a lot of agitated men harming and even committing other violent acts upon men. It's like crabs in a barrel, male edition. That is what is ultimately going to be like the end of the Roman Empire. If men don't check other men and work collectively to make things more equitable, not only for women but for themselves, because this is kind of like a crisis of morality, a crisis of identity, and a crisis of stability. But it is men who are going to be able to take on the reins and navigate a better direction, because it is men who control patriarchy, it is men who control capitalism, and it is men who are taking the blows of being rejected by the system that they hold on a mantle, until they realize that it too, capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and all that is a form of subjugation, is a form of false idolism. Then they will continue to run the rat race, fail at the rat race, feel rejected by the rat race, and then feel it is their divine response to attack the system. So this is where you see a lot more shootings, a lot more rage against the system, whether we're talking about the Kyle Rittenhouses, whether we're talking about the MAGA hats, whether we're talking about whatever, you're going to see a more increase of that, because they are not able to fulfill the societal benchmark of what an American white male feels entitled to, including entitled to the bodies of women, entitled to being the Brads and Chads of their fictitious, psychotic, quote unquote, reality, as well as the sense of superiority because they are in control of not only their own destiny, but in control of their communities. So a lot of men feel basically sunned. And the way that Black Southern men feel that wince when they hear boy, they like, ugh! They have like a natural aversion, like, ugh! White men are starting to feel that way in a way that they have never had to feel in a very long time, right? Because they could always escape racism and black people and this, that, and the third, but now there isn't an escape dog. Now they have to see like their own white brothers have left them behind. And that's what is really grinding their gears. Their own fellow white brothers have left them behind. It's okay to leave the Negro male behind. It's okay to leave the women behind. It's okay to leave the Indian, aka Native American, indigenous people behind. It's okay to leave the less than, the ones who are lower on the hierarchy of society behind. But white men, whether we're talking about, again, the MAGA hats, the incels, the MGTOW, even the trailer, quote unquote, trash from West Virginia, the ones who are left over from the Rust Belt, the ones who are left over when a lot of these industries have left, they feel rejected in ways that they never thought that would happen to them as white American men. Black incels makes no sense, but you know, patriarchy.
What more do you want from me?
And the absolute last side note, I believe. I want to say back in 2016-17, I was in an Uber and I had like a shared ride Uber thing with this old white man, and we were in like the Symphony Hall area. Yeah, I'm from Massachusetts, throwing it out there as well. Symphony Hall area, and he told me in the 70s rent was like $500, and he was like, even back then that seemed like super fucking expensive. And he's like, today I can't even think about how much money it would cost to live in this area. And if you're from Massachusetts, enough said, you already know, keep it pushing. Ain't near nothing affordable there, okay? And I say this to say is that capitalism, of course, right? But with time changing, right? People coming, people leaving, businesses are rising up, businesses falling down. Like nothing dramatically has happened to that area besides business and trafficking of people, trafficking of business, traffic of like cars, just movement, period. And because it has an increased amount of movement, all of a sudden the same real estate property has dramatically increased. Nothing physically has changed. It's not like there's gold or oil underneath the land. Yet, because capitalism says so, now an area that had its original DNA of community and business and culture and its own identity has shifted to the prepackaged identity of what that location is supposed to be based on the market rate. So whatever that didn't qualify as the market rate, let's just say $5,000, if you're not able to produce that amount of money from the traffic, then you don't matter. So the people that made the community, the neighbors, the children, the food, the music, all of that had to go because capitalism said so. And that's what capitalism does. It uproots the humanity of not us as individual people, but even a communal space. It kills the literal vibes. Gentrification literally kills the literal vibration, energy, frequency. Think about that.
We got beat.
Free job and rap is life where I'm from. Where I'm from, a mod play with Izzy where I'm from. Where I'm from, it be like run your coat black. Jupiter keeps a fat beats by the pack where I'm from. Nappy hair is life. We be reading Marks where I'm from. The kids be rocking Clarks where I'm from. You turn around your cap, you talk over a beat, and dig some sounds booming out of Jeep where I'm from. Cocoons hide the youth, twin units 100 proof. You want some beef, they will cut you somewhere I'm from. The beats is infinite where I'm from. Voodoo at Shubanin, gangsta lean where I'm from. I'm interplanetary, my insect movements vary. It's kinky if it's hair, G where I'm from. The fire hoses blow, it's purple when it's snow. I do a hit and go, split.
We live to love and we love to rock mics. We speak in ghetto tongue, cause ghetto's the life. Food for thought, so get a buffet plate. The lyrics are so fat, you might gain weight. So just watch me step alone into the sunset. Left foot, right foot, 1, 2, mic check.
Venus as a fool at the square, right?
Yeah.
Doctors, engineer, and a pair, right?
Yeah.
Hip-hop made a point last year, right?
Yeah.
But planets is the joint this year, right?
Yeah.
Planets got the duds and live to grass hop. Dug out from the fuzz that sweat the hip-hop. Rising like we foam, get it from the dome. I'm from where the fat beats stretch for mad blocks.
Because I remember growing up, since I'm making videos, I was actually born in Brighton, Massachusetts, okay? Beth Israel Hospital, okay? Very Jewish, very Boston, okay? I remember the area that I first lived in Massachusetts had a very robust population. And a lot of Asians, but there was a lot of even Haitians and like first generation and a lot of like newly migrated people, right? Soon as Boston found that area, that North Harvard, Commonwealth Ave area, very profitable for business and very profitable for real estate and very profitable for college yuppies who have enough federal loan money to spend and daddy's money to spend, that energy, that frequency, those people, the culture that made that area that slowly dissipated until it just became just another college hub, just another college student central area where it's just like, we're here for this season, we're gone the next, to the point where Boston is not even a community the way that it used to be in the 90s and before. It's just a transitional hub. It's kind of like living in a train station like Manhattan, or living in, for those who live in New York, like where is that place? Like JFK Airport, or living in one of those bus terminals. That's what Massachusetts, specifically the Boston area, has turned into. There's no real rootedness the way that it used to be. It's transactional. It's transitional. It's seasonal. It's high and by. It's not really a community anymore. And that's what capitalism does.
Yo, Mr. Doorman, you think you're slick. You sold crack to my sister and now she's sick. But if she happened to die because of your drug,